Last but not least, Professor Nick Bambos is in the School of Engineering at Stanford University. Nick is a world-renowned expert in analysis and high-performance design of computer systems and networks using AI, machine learning techniques, stochastic modeling, and optimization. And in the last few years, I think I know why, he has been working on epidemics, on networks, and control of viral propagation, which have, of course, applications also to social network. Nick.
Thank you very much, Rad. Let's see if we can bring up the... Yes. So actually, in the last few years, since COVID actually started, I started thinking about how what I was observing and I was learning about COVID could map to other areas in computer systems in particular, and especially to rumor spreading. And the issue there would be how to mitigate rumor spreading in certain environments. So what I will show you is a particular perspective. It's not complete. It's kind of in the making. But I would like to establish some analogies and also see how we can use AI techniques where they could intervene to actually mitigate rumor spreading. So what is a rumor or misinformation epidemic, and why am I calling it an epidemic? Actually, it is a spreading phenomenon. It is virally spreading. It could be very quick and very wide. And it could have catastrophic consequences. It may, not always. It may have catastrophic consequences. And there are a lot of analogies to pathogen epidemics, which have been studied a lot. Actually, COVID is a pathogen. I mean, the pandemic was essentially a pathogen epidemic gone pandemic. So in this business, actually, detecting early is really important, because if you catch an epidemic early on and you hit it and you kill it because you detected it early on and you had the right tools to kill it, then there will be no harm done. But if not, and it explodes, then to stop it, I'm not even sure you can stop it. You can mitigate it in certain ways, but up to that, you can't really, you will have to suffer the consequences. So what is important is reaction on time and at scale. And these are things that are reminiscent of what we see in computer networks also. The scale is immense, and reaction on time, I will have to explain that a bit. So AI techniques, as you will see, will kind of influence this aspect here, which has to do with the mitigation of the rumor or misinformation epidemic. Actually, the reason why I put these equations here is not to go through them, but these are kind of the vanilla equations in epidemiology for pathogen epidemics, viruses, let's say, real viruses, not computer viruses. And there are two parameters that play a key role here. Here I'm going to call it rumor transmission rate. For example, if someone is, by the way, there are three populations that we need to look at. The susceptible population, so someone that hasn't heard the rumor yet is susceptible to that rumor. Someone that has heard the rumor and finds it believable enough to think it's true, and therefore it can propagate it to someone else, that person would be infected, would correspond to an infected individual in epidemiological terms. And someone that was infected but has thought enough about it or has heard additional information to counteract that and eventually conclude that the rumor was not true and therefore it shouldn't be propagated, that would be a recovered or removed in epidemiological terms, individual, and they wouldn't actually be reinfected by the same rumor because they heard it, even if they believed it for a while. Eventually, they decided it was not true, and they stopped propagating it. So this type of equations are very well studied in epidemiology, and there are these two parameters. The infection rate, for example, if I believe in a certain rumor, or if I believe enough, and I talk to someone else, with what strength, so to speak, I will make that person believe in that too. So that would be here the rumor transmission rate from me to someone else. And only an infected individual, someone actually that has believed that rumor to be true, and therefore decides to propagate it, will, or can propagate. And then there is the rumor clearing or recovery rate, which is the other parameter. Now, these two parameters that map actually to the corresponding epidemiological parameters, if I divide them, this is actually a key quantity, which in epidemiology, it's called infectivity. And this is actually what we will be playing with. Now, I can add, and I will, several other features in that model. And it's kind of work in progress, as I mentioned. But one of the things that I want to add is actually mobility of the actors or the carriers of the rumors. For example, I leave this room. I have believed in a certain rumor that I caught or I got infected by in this room, and I go to another room and I start talking about it there, and then this will, I will infect some people there, and they will go elsewhere, and so on. So the more mobility I have while I'm infected and not recovered yet, the more people potentially I can infect with that. Now, I keep referring to people, but actually, it's not only people. Think of a social network where essentially I'm talking with my contacts or my friends, let's say, and we are exchanging messages, and these messages could be including misinformation, and this misinformation is propagated to my own contact network or friend network and so on. And mobility there could correspond that my own contact network in this social network is changing over time. And therefore, I come in contact, or I have, my friends are changing over time, and I can infect different individuals, and I have disconnected from some, and I have connected with new ones, and so on. And even above that, having messages communicate, think of AI agents exchanging information on their own, quote unquote, social network. What does that mean? I don't want to go that far. We haven't thought about it that much yet, right? But this could be where this could go eventually. So what happens is that this beta parameter that I was mentioning before plays a role in the following way. Imagine that I infect a certain area in space, and I let it go. So I infect a certain region. Then what I will see is basically a shock wave that will propagate of the infection. The infection will propagate as a shock wave, as I was saying, and then it will be followed by another wave front actually, of recovered individuals, because the population will be infected in a certain region, and after a while it will recover. So I have this shock wave propagating, this double shock wave, and the question becomes, if I let it propagate for a long time, and I look very far away, what is called the far field, will I actually see the infection going there or not? So it turns out that if beta is less than 1, then this infection will die out. It will propagate close to the initial infection point, but then it will gradually die out. But if beta is greater than 1, then it will propagate to the far field, very far away from the infection point. So to make a long story short, I could start adding other useful features. For example, rumor checking. For example, in epidemiology, you could add testing centers. Actually, that's what we did during the COVID pandemic. At some point, we figured out what the test. Just remember what happened in COVID. A test started coming out, right? Different versions, one better than the other and so on. And people started being tested, right? And then there was social distancing, quarantining. That's before the vaccine, right? Before the vaccine. So the first measure was just social distancing. So the corresponding thing here would be the carriers of the rumor, right, to be informed about the possibility of this being just a rumor, which would prevent them essentially from propagating it further. Again, I'm making things very simple here because I want to kind of project them to as close to COVID, so to speak, as possible, because this is the experience we all have. That's one good thing about COVID, right? It was such a universal experience. Everybody understands what we went through, okay? So anyway, there is analysis that goes behind this, this idea, and there is a parameter. I'm not going to go through it. There is some eigenvalue of an operator and this and that one has to look at and so on. But what one can see is that if the parameter is right, then what will happen is that the epidemic will propagate and explode. And if the parameter is below a certain threshold, then it will die out. Now, the next thing is, what if this propagation is in a random environment? For example, I infect this is space, and I infect at certain points with rumors, with a certain rumor, the population. And this infected population will create a wave actually that will propagate. However, now the wave propagates between areas where the infectivity is very high. For example, these areas, right, the beta max. So there are certain areas, certain blocks, so to speak, where the infectivity is very strong and there is a lot of propagation, right? People believe and propagate the rumor. And other areas which are very, very low, the infectivity is very low. It turns out actually that looking at the average infectivity is the wrong thing to be looking at. So in this case, I have the beta max and the beta mean, right? So the dark areas have very high infectivity. The light areas have very low infectivity. And this is the average infectivity in this field. Now, here is an interesting thing. It is possible that even if the average infectivity, or if this epidemic on average is subcritical and would die out, actually, if you look at the particulars of the infectivity, especially the fluctuations, especially the high fluctuations, then it could actually propagate. And the reason is the following, and that's kind of the end of my talk. Here, we have very high infectivity. And what happens is that this area where I have individuals that believe in the rumor and propagate it, because this area is very receptive to that, the rumor epidemic will explode here. This is a super spreader region. It's corresponding to the super spreading events. Actually, you remember Bergamo in the case of COVID and what happened there in Italy? right, where there was a super spreader event and so on. So corresponding phenomena occur here. So how can AI help us? First of all, through very early detection. We need to detect very early on whether some rumor is true, in which case it is not really a rumor, right, or not. So when a piece of news, for example, shows up, could we assemble, could an AI agent rapidly assemble the resources to do fact-checking and decide whether something is or is not true? First of all, how do we know that a rumor is out there and has the potential to propagate? For example, in the very early days of COVID, how did we know that there is something going wrong? I don't know if you recall, but I believe it was December of 2019, December of 2019, when the first signals started emerging, right? The first data started coming in, but it was something unknown. How can you characterize something that is totally unknown? You see it for the first time. So I think that this is definitely an area where AI can play a role, number one. Number two, as it evolves, now you know that something strange and new is out there. But you need to keep an eye to make sure that it is propagating strongly enough so that you need to do something about it. And finally, you need to assemble on the spot and at scale the resources and deploy them, fact-checking resources that is, and deploy them to stop the rumor from propagating as early as possible. Because if you don't, then it will propagate so much, or it will escalate so much, that it is going to be 10 times more difficult, actually 1,000,000 times more difficult to stop it, and the consequences will be dramatic. So with that, I will finish, and thank you.